Kellerman's barn, the secret the elite buried. Every spring, between 1843 and 1847, Mississippi's wealthiest families watched their daughters vanish, quietly, completely, and without explanation. There were no graves. No bodies recovered. Just careful stories, European finishing schools. Marriages arranged far away in Charleston. Convenient lies that let everyone keep their place at the table. But in Adams County archives, where forgotten papers sometimes outlast the people who tried to silence them, someone kept a record that didn't match the official version. A leather-bound diary. Notes. Dates. Names. And a description of what happened inside the barn at the Kellerman estate, where Catherine Kellerman was punished in a way so brutal that 3 men believed they had only one chance to stop it. 1. Natchez, 1843, appearances as a weapon. In spring 1843, Natchez looked polished enough to hide anything. Mansions sat above the Mississippi River like white monuments, their columns and gardens maintained by enslaved labor, their owners competing not only in land and cotton, but in bloodlines and reputation. Lucinda Kellerman was one of the sharpest blades in that world. In 1831, she inherited nearly all of the Kellerman plantation from her father, an uncommon transfer that made her wealthy and, to others, threatening. At 42, she ruled social life with precision. Her dinner parties were exacting. Even flowers had to be arranged the correct way. And her obsession had a target, her 19-year-old daughter, Catherine. Catherine's body was her mother's nightmare. After her father's death in 1839, Catherine's weight rose sharply, too much, too fast, making her, in Lucinda's eyes, an embarrassment and a public stain. Lucinda had every influence, every method, and every opportunity, and Catherine had none. What Lucinda never fully confessed to herself was that Catherine had changed after her father's death. The official cause was heart failure. The whispered truth was darker. Thomas Kellerman had died in his study with an empty bottle nearby and a letter in his hand, a letter Lucinda destroyed before anyone else could read it. 2. The men Lucinda bought for obedience. Lucinda ran the plantation with brutal efficiency, employing 237 enslaved people across fields, house, gardens, and workshops. Among them were 3 men who would later become more than workers, they would become witnesses, protectors, and ultimately, escape partners. Joshua Fletcher, 34, born on the Kellerman land, trained as a blacksmith. Silent by habit, observant by nature, and storing every cruelty like evidence meant for the future. Samuel Hayes, 28, purchased at a Natchez auction in 1841. He was valuable because he could read and write, something rare enough to be dangerous. Daniel Cooper, 16, bought in youth and strength from a failing Louisiana plantation. He'd learned early how the world punishes people for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. These men were brought into Lucinda's plan, because when cruelty is systematic, someone always has to do the labor. 3. The barn, where correction became murder. The barn stood apart from the main house, an older structure repurposed by 1843 for grain storage and repairs. Live oaks hid it from the mansion's windows, and that isolation made it useful. On March 15, 1843, Lucinda's diary recorded her fascination with another family's miraculous transformation. One of her society acquaintances had reportedly taken a daughter, once plump and unmarriageable, and turned her into something delicate through non-stop physical labor. Lucinda didn't call it punishment. She called it salvation. On March 16, Lucinda summoned Joshua, Samuel, and Daniel to the parlor. She framed the task as rehabilitation. Catherine would be corrected, made suitable for what society expected of her. The work would be documented. The tone, she insisted, would stay carefully concealed behind the rules of discipline. Catherine was never asked if she agreed. On March 17, she was led to the barn under night clothes and a work dress chosen by her mother. The first days were mechanical and rehearsed, corn ground by stone mill, heavy sacks carried from one end of the building to the other, firewood split until hands blistered. Lucinda visited each afternoon at precisely 3 o'clock, carrying a leather journal like a surgeon with a stopwatch. She measured weight, recorded changes, and assessed temperament in clinical terms. And the deeper truth was this: the work wasn't aimed at improvement. It was designed to exhaust a body until it stopped being inconvenient. 4. The secret spreads, then the daughters begin to disappear. By April, other plantation families came to see what they were told was effective treatment. Helena Cartwright, Beatrice Singleton, Constance Whitfield. Their daughters, each one problematic in some way according to society, were brought into similar isolation. The pattern became clear faster than anyone expected. Isolation. Labor. Forced compliance disguised as health. But Lucinda's methods didn't end with Catherine. As spring moved toward summer, Daniel began noticing gaps. Barns that had once been open to grain deliveries became restricted. White young women who were regular at gatherings suddenly vanished, their mothers offering stock excuses: illness, relocation, relatives visiting. And in the barns, the girls worked, until they didn't. 5. Unexpected humanity in stolen moments. Inside the barn, something else happened that Lucinda couldn't control. Catherine didn't complain. She didn't plead. She worked as if she'd been trained to accept humiliation. But the men, Joshua, Samuel, and Daniel, behaved differently than Lucinda expected. They didn't mock her size. They didn't treat her like an object. They helped her survive. Catherine noticed the difference when she finally spoke beyond asking for water. She asked Joshua a question that showed how trapped she truly felt. "Do you hate me?" Joshua's answer wasn't forgiveness, it was truth. They were bound to the same system, but hate would cost too much energy. Survival required something else: purpose. In whispered conversations during breaks, Catherine learned what she had never been allowed to know about people like them, and what they had never been allowed to hope for about people like her. Then, in late June, the barn became a place where their hearts made their own rules. Catherine and Joshua grew close, dangerously so. Their affection developed in secret, protected by the other's careful positioning. But secrets attract attention. By mid-July, Samuel and Daniel understood what was happening. They tried to create distance when they needed privacy. They adjusted tasks, shifted locations, bought time with everyday routines. Still, the truth was heading toward disaster. Lucinda, meanwhile, didn't watch her daughter as closely as before. She was busy expanding her operation, training other families, offering her methodology, dreaming in profit and control. 6. Pregnancy, panic, and the ledger of resolved girls. Sometime in early August, Catherine began experiencing morning sickness. At first, she blamed the labor. But when her monthly courses failed to return, she understood what had happened. She told Joshua. The reaction was immediate: fear, shock, then tenderness so intense it brought tears to Catherine's eyes. Because pregnancy could not remain hidden, Lucinda would not tolerate it. Not in Catherine, and not in the men who might become witnesses. When Lucinda discovered Catherine's condition, the consequences would not be correction. They would be removal. Even before Catherine fully realized the scope of what her mother had done, Samuel had seen enough to confirm it. In Lucinda's records, a ledger marked household expenses carried names, girls who had undergone the treatment before Catherine. Beside each name, entries about how their cases were ended. Resolved. Disposed of due to natural causes. Transferred far away. Quietly handled. When Daniel asked what resolved meant, Samuel's response was simple. Nothing good. 7. The impossible plan. There was no money, no documents in easy reach, no transportation arranged by Mercy. The tools of freedom didn't exist for them unless someone risked everything to take them. Catherine suggested what felt like a miracle: access to her father's study. Thomas Kellerman had hidden papers and money where Lucinda never went. The key was kept in a music box on Lucinda's dressing table. The timing had to be perfect. The household had to be distracted. The barn needed an alibi. And on August 17, 1843, Catherine began the first phase. She staged illness so Lucinda would bring her to the main house and confine her to her room. Under cover of forced attention, Catherine went to the study. She found the truth Lucinda had tried to bury. A letter. Money. And most importantly, proof her father had planned something Lucinda never intended to follow. Thomas hadn't died of heart failure. He'd taken his own life, guilt consuming him after years of participating in the system. He left Catherine his will with instructions that enslaved people were to be manumitted upon his death. Lucinda had forged signatures and kept operating the plantation as if inheritance meant legitimacy. That revelation gave Catherine leverage, but only if they could reach the outside world and survive long enough to use it. 8. Escape, and the horror of cleaned barns. They planned to leave at night, walk away from roads where patrols waited, and reach Natchez before dawn. Samuel would find a forger in town, Crawford. Joshua would secure supplies. Daniel would stay behind with an alibi so Lucinda would believe Catherine had escaped alone. Catherine would travel disguised as a widow with servants, using stolen paperwork. It was a plan full of ways to fail. And just when they thought they were ready, Daniel delivered the final blow. He had learned about other girls Catherine hadn't even met. Barns where they had been kept were now empty and scrubbed clean. Evidence erased. Daniel reported that Cartwright, Singleton, and Whitfield girls had all vanished after Lucinda visited. Catherine understood then, Lucinda wasn't just testing bodies. She was hiding consequences. 9. The steamboat trap. They reached Natchez and approached the steamboat office. Catherine performed the role she'd practiced, gentry widow requesting passage north. The tickets were granted. The group boarded. But outside their cabin window, Catherine saw someone watching, someone with the posture of a man who already knew their story. A slave catcher. And in less than an hour, the world closed in. Lucinda boarded the steamboat with sheriff's men and weapons. Her entrance wasn't frantic, it was controlled. She didn't beg. She declared authority. Joshua, Samuel, and Daniel were struck into submission and taken at gunpoint. Catherine expected to be afraid. Instead, she felt rage, because Lucinda's confidence had survived every step, until Catherine's knowledge forced doubt. Lucinda tried to claim Catherine's treatment was sound, that some bodies simply lacked the constitution to survive. She treated murder like paperwork. Catherine screamed accusation. Lucinda answered with cold logic. Then came the moment that shifted the balance. Samuel told the truth, or at least enough of it to make Lucinda calculate risk. He claimed copies of documents had been sent north, to lawyers, to abolitionists, to newspapers. If that were even partially true, Lucinda's network couldn't contain the damage. Lucinda hesitated. And the sheriff, uncertain, troubled, ordered custody rather than execution on the spot. 10. Jail, betrayal of resolved, and the testimony that broke the elite. Catherine was jailed separately. Days passed in a silence built from hunger and uncertainty. Her guards didn't answer questions. Her needs were limited to keep her alive, not keep her comfortable. Joshua and the others were treated worse. On the fourth day, Daniel appeared bruised, alive but beaten, warning Catherine they didn't have much time. The implication was clear, their disappearance could become a tragic outcome arranged by those in power. But then Dr. Harrison arrived with unusual urgency, and Lucinda's world started cracking. Catherine was moved quickly, transported to the courthouse. 2 investigators from the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society waited in formal dress, people who listened for the kinds of details Mississippi officials usually dismissed. Lucinda tried to control the narrative. Catherine couldn't. Catherine testified. Full detail. The barn. The forced labor. The missing girls. The hidden will. The forged documents. The murders disguised as natural deaths. When Joshua's fate was revealed, it wasn't punishment, it was elimination without trial, ordered under the shield of elite influence. Samuel was brought forward to testify while wounded. Daniel corroborated the timeline. Evidence surfaced that could no longer be smothered in silence. Lucinda's conviction became inevitable. Other plantation families were dragged into scrutiny. Some fled the state. Some destroyed evidence. Some claimed ignorance so loudly it sounded like guilt. Lucinda Kellerman was convicted for multiple murders, forgery, and theft. She was sentenced to life imprisonment, dying later in prison, her grave left unmarked, her name erased from society pages that had once worshipped her cruelty. 11. The bones under the barn. Catherine's story did not end with execution. She gave birth in February 1844, naming her son Thomas Joshua. She inherited the plantation using her father's legitimate will and immediately began the process of manumission, freeing everyone enslaved on Kellerman land. Samuel survived and remained to help manage the transition. Daniel pursued education, a life Lucinda had tried to deny him. The barn, the place where bodies were exhausted into silence, was torn down in spring 1844. In the earth beneath it, they discovered the truth Lucinda had tried to erase. Multiple shallow graves. 7 girls. 7 lives treated as disposable. 7 daughters from families that had known too much and chosen to look away. And for the first time, their names weren't erased. They were recorded. Their stories were told.